Welcome to part 3 of sound in our lives. I'm still not that good at figuring out these videos, so I didn't make correct assumptions. I apologize. This is going to look at some of the details of how it works in our body and what has been found out there in more detail. One, if you think about it, if you want to look at the spiritual elements of earth, fire, water, air, and spirit or space, well, sound affects us physically, it affects us emotionally, it can affect us energetically, mentally, and spiritually. And what ends up happening, I believe, is that sound goes to the level needed most urgently, shall we say. Um, I don't know if you've heard of something called somatics. I think I'm pronouncing it right. It's the study of patterns evoked by sound. If I remember correct, a Swiss scientist he played with sand and a special kind of uh, pollen from moss, I think. He put it on a vibrating tray, then he'd play a certain tone, like a violin A on a violin, and he discovered that the vibrations from that A on that plate turned the sand or the pollen, or I think he's even used iron filings, and it turned it into patterns. Some of you may be familiar with sacred geometry. I can handle geometry. Sacred geometry is cool, but that's not one of the areas I know much about yet. But different tones ended up making different patterns. You might think about Dr. Emoto's messages from water. Similar, except he used the written word. Later on, he moved into sound and what it did to the water crystals. But cymatics it basically shows, and I've actually seen this in some of my some of my metal bowls. And if you get a large enough bowl, should be 9-inch or bigger, fill it like 2/3, and then just sing it. And 50% of the time, you're going to notice a pattern forming on the water. My understanding is sound is the next step up from matter. So here we got matter, and sound is what affects matter most directly. Now, if we're looking at basically the way our body, some of the new research found in our body, Marcel Vogel, I don't know if you've heard of him. I think he was at Bell Labs. He's the creator of the Vogel crystal, which is a pretty amazing crystal. I owned one briefly. He and a co-worker, Norman Mikesell, found that healthy tissue was more like a liquid crystal than it was fluid. Imagine if you've got a healthy body, it's like you've got a lot of mood rings inside you, because the mood ring is this amorphous liquid crystal, and it flowed back and forth depending on what was flowing through it. That also the body had a more crystalline structure, the cells did, than it did fluid. So apparently, if we want to have good health, and this is something I took from Jonathan Goldman, he says if you're in good health, you're in sound health. Well, it's one of many definitions, but there's something about, and our bodies are roughly about 70% water. I know people throw different numbers out, but I think 70 is fairly accurate. There was a French musician, martial artist, and acupuncturist who started doing research. I think he researched for like 20 years, different aspects of sound and its effects on the bodies. He first started using sound instead of needles and acupuncture points and discovered that he could still make effects. Now, I had a chiropractor about 5 years ago tell me my personal tone, and she just knew it. He also He worked with some other people and discovered that all energy, I call them energy organs, because you don't just have the chakras. You've got the middle pillar, you've got the meridians, you've got the nadirs, depending on what system you're working with. And you've got all these different layers of energy organs on top of your physical. He noticed that all of those, the tissues and organs in the body, they all had a musical tone. And recently I found an article online that scientists had confirmed this in traditional Chinese medicine. It was through the National Institute of Health. But I'm doing a separate uh, video on the tones on that. But what really got me, because I'm working on some health issues myself, and since establishment medicine does not work well for me, in the last 20 years, I've had to be in charge of my own, and I'm not recommending it, but this is just my reality. I have not had insurance, I have not had money, and then I've discovered the few times I went to the establishment system, their medicines did not clear things up. It only went so far, and I still had to do the alternative. So for some of the issues I'm working with, I'm working very much with sound because that's what's been keeping me going. And he talked about sound tends to stimulate healthy cells. It tends to, and I'll get into structured water elsewhere, but it tends to structure the insides of the cells. It's like a mini, they described it as a mini or a micro massage for the organs and cells to help them get relaxed and back into balance and harmony. And it could even heal or harmonize damaged cells or cells. Well, he has something else. It harmonized and healed damaged ones. And now he specifically looked at cancer cells. I prefer to just think that this works on any foreign cell that's out of balance that's come in the body. He noticed that as you went up the scale chromatically, the body itself started thriving on it and got stronger, but as you went up, the invaders like the candida or whatever, they started getting, basically they were more rigid, and they started getting uh, less defined. And finally, between the notes B, A, and B, they disintegrated. Now, I think that's pretty cool. Now, it's something they've discovered. The establishment hasn't agreed with this, and that's cool. It's something I'm looking more into because of my own issues, and it's something you can think about. I would not recommend being in my situation because if you've got access to the others, use this as a compliment. For someone like me, it's all I've got. But entrainment, I want to talk a bit about entrainment, and then we're going to get into details on other things later. I think the most important thing you need to realize is that we entrain on sound whether we like it or not. Um, Imagine a room full of old grandfather clocks. The biggest one there, you get it going at a certain pace, and each of the others you do. Within 24 hours, they've all entrained, or they're all ticking back, tick tock, tick tock, with the biggest one, because this was the most powerful one, and all the others joined in. And so, this is why it's so important to start realizing what kind of sounds are affecting you. Do you like what's happening? And if you don't, how do you want to change it? If you spend all your time in places that play music that puts you always on edge and you don't even realize it, you're in training on it. And if it's putting you in mental spaces you don't like and it might make you, this is things to think about. And we're going to move to a different video now.